Hi everyone. In this paper, Dr. Caroline Cartwright and I present results of 2 seasons of excavations at the rural site of Khirbet Ghozlan. These were partly funded by the 2019 ASOR Harris grant. In particular, we explore the case for interpreting Ghozlan as a specialised seasonal site for the production and temporary storage of olive oil in the late 3rd millennium BCE. Khirbet Ghozlan is a tiny site located in the middle reaches of the Wadi Rayyan in the eastern escarpment of the Jordan Rift Valley. It sits on a pronounced knoll which drops sharply into the wadi below. The small site is remarkable for an ovoid enclosure wall, although built mostly as a single row of medium stones around the edge of the steep sides. The northern segment is constructed as a double row of megalithic slabs. This segment controls access to the site across a low saddle. Enclosure sites are unusual in the EB4 settlement landscape. Rather, most sites were small, undefended agro-pastoral villages, newly founded as populations dispersed from nucleated settlements at the end of the EB2-3. Occupation continued at several medium sites, often incorporating extant defensive walls, and 3 large sites were newly founded in the Jordan Valley along the 3 strongest waterways draining the East Rift Escarpment: Shah Hagalan on the Yarmouk, Tel Hamad on the Zaka, and Tel Iktanu on the Kafrain. Tel El Hammam continued to be occupied within a reconfigured EB2-3 circuit wall. However, at least 6 enclosure sites don't quite fit these categories. Like typical farming villages, these are small, newly founded sites, mostly less than a hectare in size. However, they are only found in the uplands of the Rift Escarpment and on features such as knolls or ridges that are easily defended. More striking, they are surrounded by stone enclosure walls. Why defend such small sites? The excavators of Khirbet Ghozlan interpret this enclosure as a first-order site controlling a hinterland of 40 other settlements. However, this settlement hierarchy model doesn't address why a 0.8 hectare site was defended when, for example, the massive 20 hectare settlement at Tel Hamad in the nearby Jordan Valley was not. When reviewing the enclosures at Jebel Rahel and Khirbet Rasefa, Palumbo suggested these were agricultural settlements defended to protect farmers from nomadic incursions, given their location on the cusp between desert and sown. However, this model doesn't account for other enclosure sites such as Khirbet Ghozlan found within fertile areas away from the desert steppe. We propose an alternate model that takes as significant the location of all enclosure sites in upland zones. These well-drained slopes of the Rift Escarpment are far better suited to upland horticultural production than the flood-prone Jordan Valley floor. Indeed, olive, Olea europaea, grows best at altitudes of 300 to 800 metres above sea level and in areas that receive 300 to 500 millimetres of rainfall each year. Accordingly, we suggest that enclosure sites were specialised processing centres for upland fruit crops such as olive and were enclosed to protect seasonally produced caches of high-value liquid commodities such as oil. How do we test this hypothesis? To understand the archaeological signatures of olive oil production, it's necessary to review the processes of olive oil extraction. The following photographs were taken during the olive harvest in November last year. Traditionally, the harvest commences after the first autumn rains have washed the ripening fruit of the summer dust. The olives are shaken or raked from the branches onto sheets. They are sorted from leaves and twigs and collected into sacks. The fruit is then crushed, flesh and stone, into a tapenade-like paste. This could be done by rolling crushing stones over a grinder or, like in the Tubna olive mill near Deir Abu Said, by a mechanized roller. The paste is smeared onto circular fibrous mats that are stacked like pancakes for pressing. The mats are pressed by weight, such as the reconstructed lever press on the left, or by a mechanized vise, like in the Tubna mill on the right. Once pressed, the crushed olive debris is removed from the mats. Known in Arabic as jift, this byproduct is collected for use as fertilizer or, as the man shoveling jift into sacks told us, as a ready source of fuel. Today, oil is drained from the press and collected directly. However, as oil collected pre-mechanization usually contained a significant proportion of water, it was traditionally stored in jars or vats for several weeks to allow the water and oil to separate before a purer oil could be decanted away. In short, the material culture of oil production should include features such as rock-cut presses and collection vats, stone processing equipment, and ceramic store jars. In addition, archaeobotanical remains should include olive pits or, more significantly, crushed olive gift. So, back to Khirbet Ghozlan. First, it's important to stress that at 370 metres above sea level, the site lies in a Goldilocks zone for olive horticulture. The slopes are well drained and receive some of the highest rainfalls in Jordan. The site is surrounded by modern olive groves, some of which are centuries old. The Wadi Rayyan was surveyed in the late 1980s by Mabry and Palumbo. In 2009, I surveyed in detail the Tel Arras Ridge, along which Mabry and Palumbo had recorded extensive dolmen cemeteries. In addition to its dolmens and cairns, we also detected several presses cut into the limestone bedrock along the Tel Arras Ridge. Indicated in yellow, these features consisted of an upper rectangular crushing vat that sloped gently to a cylindrical channel through which the oil could be funneled into a container. 6 examples of this type of press were found in the western edge of the survey area, overlooking the knoll of Khirbet Ghozlan. If you stand on this knoll and look west, then you look down the Rayyan to the Jordan Valley and the hills beyond. And if you turn 180 degrees and you look up the Wadi towards Ajloun and the Transjordan Plateau. We conducted limited excavations for 4 weeks in 2017. These initial trenches are shown in blue. We then returned with a larger team for a 4-week season in November 2019. These trenches are shown in red. We can describe these excavations in 3 areas. Area A denotes the monumental northern segment of the enclosure wall that controlled access to the knoll from the Tel Arras Ridge. Excavations determined that the wall was constructed directly over rising bedrock. Where the bedrock dipped, the ground had been prepared with levelling fills and bedding stones. Rectilinear lines amongst the dispersed tumble suggest auxiliary features outside the wall. These include a couple of steps or platforms and 2 lines that appeared to define a stone ramp. The wall was probably entered where several slabs had been placed flat, like a monumental threshold. This area is indicated by the arrow. Excavations inside the wall at this point would reveal a probable animal pen, suggesting that animals were brought up the ramp and across the wall into the site. A strip trench against the wall recovered exclusively early Bronze IV sherds associated with its foundations. Trench 100 was opened immediately inside this segment of the wall and confirmed its EB4 date. It quickly exposed a bedrock platform with a large natural basin that had been used as a rubbish dump. The platform had been worked into a vertical face at one edge, against which a wall had been built. A small storage bin was constructed between the bedrock and wall, containing the broken base of a jar that perhaps was used as a scoop for animal feed. An adjacent trench detected a parallel wall defining an enclosed space. This area contained a partitioned bin that resembles an animal trough, suggesting the area was an animal pen. Partitioned bins are a recurring feature at the site. A basalt hammerstone, weight and blade were also recovered. The shallow stratigraphy of these trenches reflects in general the stratigraphy across the site. Simply put, topsoil over a thick layer of tumble which sealed a very thin lens of occupation that directly overlay bedrock, natural soil or prepared levelling fills. The centre of the site is defined by a large exposure of bedrock. Excavations in Area B revealed a large compound constructed against the bedrock at its western end. The compound included two large rooms, each with a single earth surface. Two grinders had been nestled within bedrock niches before the surfaces were laid down, flush with their lip. Other rooms contained curved and partitioned rectangular storage bins, and 12 broken but partly complete storage jars were found on the floors lined up against the walls. We exposed the northern end of the compound in the following season. The back storeroom of the compound was further revealed against the bedrock, including more broken but restorable storage jars, a complete pot lid and a curved stone bin. And the adjacent trench revealed the entrance to the compound. Its front room contained another embedded grinder with store jars nearby on the floor. The storage bin outside the entrance contained a cache of Canaanite blades and complete bowls or scoops. And a curved bin behind that contained a cache of round pounders. An additional building contained a partitioned bin and several restorable storage jars. A passage between these buildings led past the entrance to the first compound and down a step to a large complete jar embedded within a bedrock niche. However, the most important discovery in this area was the fact that while these compounds had been built against exposed bedrock in the west, they had been constructed abutting a double road retaining wall in the east. This wall could be traced all the way through areas A and B, where it abutted the inside face of the monumental enclosure. These relationships demonstrate a significant degree of preparation. The occupants first chose to enclose the knoll, then they constructed a retaining wall to create a defined area against the exposed bedrock, and only then did they construct the buildings within. Indeed, a strip trench further south detected a possible return to the retaining wall, which would neatly define a discrete area in which the Area B storage compounds were built. The trench also exposed a partitioned bin in bedrock, a groundstone embedded below a floor in bedrock, and external to the retaining wall, a small pot emplacement. The pot emplacement was associated with a rectilinear structure exposed in Area C. This building was accessed through a central doorway facing east and contained several store jars, including one of several spouted jars found on the site. The ceramics are similar to those across the site, but we have yet to demonstrate the stratigraphic relationship of this structure to those in Area B. To summarise, the primacy of the monumental enclosure wall suggests the knoll was selected for its defensible location. The architecture was planned. The enclosure was constructed first, then a retaining wall to define a discrete area in which the storage compounds were built. The evidence suggests limited activity and use. The rooms contained only single surfaces, and there was no evidence of remodelling. The site was abandoned, and its standing architecture gradually tumbled into a vast ruin field of stone. Are these observations consistent with a specialised industrial site? Certainly the material culture supports this hypothesis, although note that the botanical, faunal, ceramic and chip stone assemblages so far processed derive only from the trenches excavated in 2017. A study season was planned for 2020, but alas has been postponed due to COVID. The archaeobotanical evidence from these 4 trenches is surprisingly limited. Macro fragments of charred wood were collected in field, and 20-litre flotation samples were taken from all sealed EB4 contexts. The charred wood samples were sent to Caroline Cartwright at the British Museum, who identified their species by examining each sample from 3 planes under a scanning electron microscope. The results were extraordinary. As these beautiful SEM images show, every single sample was from olive wood, Olea europaea. These had probably been burned as fuel, and the split in the image on the left was caused by heat. Furthermore, Caroline examined the minute remains obtained from flotation. The story was the same. Wood charcoal fragments were present, but were exclusively olive. In addition, several of these were from suckers or saplings. Such green shoots would not usually be selected for fuel, but they are pruned away during orchard maintenance. Finally, Caroline identified in every flotation sample fragments of charred gift, the crushed olive stones collected after pressing and commonly used as fuel. This data provides a direct index that olive crushing had taken place nearby. The archaeobotanical data is compelling. First, it matters that only olive wood was found. Compare this situation to, for example, the early Bronze IV farming village at Tel Abu en Niaj, located at the mouth of the Wadi Rayyan on the Jordan Valley floor. Here, an array of species suggests people sourced fuel from wild trees and shrubs, as well as from lowland orchard taxa, in this case mostly fig. In contrast, the dominance of olive wood at Ghozlan suggests olive wood was in ready supply, consistent with orchard prunings stockpiled for fuel. It also matters that no charred seeds were found. At Niaj, an array of wild and domestic species were recovered consistent with agrarian activities. Indeed, many of these were probably charred as animal dung used as fuel. In contrast, the absence of pulses and cereals at Khirbet Ghozlan suggests a more specialised function, while the charred olive wood and gift suggests that dung was not needed as fuel, as orchard prunings were in ready supply. The lithic assemblage is being examined by Francesca Manclosi. Although a largely ad hoc assemblage from local flint, Francesca has detected specialised production of Canaanian blades on non-local flint sources. Several of these were found complete, cased within storage bins. Consistent notching at one end suggests they were hafted, and I wonder if these were used as Bronze Age pruning saws, similar to pruning saws used today. Marta D'Andrea has examined the ceramic assemblage, and we leave it to her to comment upon the assemblage in the discussion. However, it is important to note the restricted ceramic repertoire at the site, which is overwhelmingly dominated by necked and whole-mouth storage jars. 85% of all sherds collected in 2017 were associated with storage. Several jars are spouted at their shoulder or neck. If filled with liquid, these would be difficult to pour. Rather, I suggest they were decanting vats. containers in which oil could be left to separate from water before the lighter oil could be decanted away. Most finewares were represented by deep bowls or cups, which could possibly be used as scoops. Few cooking pot sherds were recovered, and almost no jug, platter, or lamp sherds were found. The faunal remains have been examined by Karen Wesling. Strikingly few faunal remains were found, and these images represent almost the entirety of the assemblage from both. The key point is that the assemblage was dominated by caprid remains, and these represent almost all parts of the animal, suggesting that flocks were present on the site. Indeed, spindle whorls and a basalt weight found near the so-called animal pen suggest that herding was undertaken. It's not difficult to imagine shepherds taking their flocks through the green slopes during the autumn, while the rest of the community was harvesting their orchards nearby. So, what evidence is there for olive oil production? The charred olive wood and shoots suggest that people burned orchard prunings stockpiled during the harvest. Burned jift attests crushing, and the many grinders were perhaps used for this purpose. Although impossible to date, at least 6 rock-cut presses are known on the adjacent slopes, all of which look to the knoll. Several spouted jars are possible decanting vats, and the overwhelming dominance of large jars suggests the compounds were used for storage. Lipid residue analyses will hopefully determine the nature of their contents. In addition, the absence of evidence also suggests a specialised industrial site. While we must treat absence in the archaeological record with care, the paucity of domestic debris, the few faunal remains, the absence of cereals and legumes, and the short-lived single floors all suggest activities that were limited in both nature and duration. The single architectural phase and the restricted ceramic assemblage also underscore this non-domestic type flavour. Accordingly, we propose a model in which the site was used seasonally when people from communities elsewhere in the escarpment or on the Jordan Valley floor came to this niche environmental zone to harvest their olives and maintain their orchards. Over the course of about 6 weeks, vast numbers of oil jars could have been cached within the compounds, initially for decanting and finally for storage before distribution through local settlement networks. Such high-value caches needed protection, and the enclosure wall controlled access to the knoll. This scenario is reminiscent of the Gezer calendar, which details the rhythms of agricultural life in the 10th century BCE, including 2 months in the autumn for harvesting and 2 months in the summer for pruning. And these rhythms are unchanged today. The bottom 2 photographs show an olive factory at Kufrabil in the Wadi Rayyan. For 10 months of the year, it is quiet and dark, its processing equipment under plastic. Then, in mid-October, the doors are unlocked, the lights are switched on, and the factory becomes one of the most dynamic places in Jordan, a fitting analogy to Khirbet Ghozlan, only 2 kilometres away. This research matters because it helps articulate rural complexity following the EBA collapse. Although rural communities are thought to have reverted to simple forms of agro-pastoral farming, this horticultural specialisation model suggests a complex rural economy in which communities took seasonal advantage of niche environmental zones. At the same time, they reconfigured so-called urban features such as specialised production and defensive systems within new rural frameworks. These resilient rural industries are important to understand because it is their continuity that probably served as the economic springboard upon which urban systems would eventually recover in the 2nd millennium BCE.